start this session, I would like to take a few minutes to introduce our company. ITC Accounting and Tax Consultancy is one of the top and most reliable tax agency firms in the UAE. In a short period of time, ITC has mastered how to give you the best tax solutions. What sets us apart from the competition is the uncompromised service quality and professionalism. Our team of qualified and professionals, led by Mr. Ahmed Sharafuddin, is already known in the market as VAT and excise specialist. By bringing the best team at your service, highly experienced accountants and tax specialists, ITC will continue to deliver a service that is satisfactory on levels of quality and speed. Our portfolio of customers include businesses from different industries, starting from SMEs up to big group of companies, majority of which are generated through referrals and repeated businesses. Now, I would like to take a few minutes also to introduce today's speakers. We will be having with us today Mr. Naresh Pandey, our Senior Tax Manager. Mr. Naresh is a qualified chartered accountant and a well-versed taxation and finance professional with all over 15 years of experience across the UAE and India. He is experienced in direct and indirect taxation, transfer pricing and international taxation, auditing and accounts. He has been doing financial planning and analysis, sharing taxation compliance and business insights, as well as reports for strategic business planning. Our second speaker for today is Ms. Nikita Bandari, our tax manager. Ms. Nikita has close to a decade of experience in various aspects of taxation. From tax advisory to pre-audits, she can handle with professionalism the most important, as well as the toughest, cases and clients. Meanwhile, she is also supervising her team. Her attention to the details and always do your homework attitude has made her earn her respect towards her colleagues and our customers. So without losing any more time, I would like now to give the word to Mr. Naresh Pandey to start with our today's session. Thank you, everyone. And Mr. Naresh, the words to you.
Thank you, Ms. Paula, for the wonderful introduction. And good morning, ladies and gentlemen. So I'll be covering the first 4 aspects of the VAT audit, like what is VAT audit, what are the rights of the authority, what are the rights of the taxpayer, and how we are going to be ready for the audit. So I'll start with the introduction of the VAT audit. So all the reviews and are conducted by FTA under this legislation falls under VAT audit, be it limited or extensive audit. The tax procedures related to the administration, collection, and enforcement of taxes by the authority falls under VAT audit. So why FTA undertakes VAT audit? FTA undertakes VAT audit and can visit businesses to inspect the records underlying with the taxpayer to justify either the company is paying or claiming the right amount of tax or not, they are rightfully registered or not, and whether the integrity of the tax system is maintained properly or not. So the decision made by FTA to audit an entity cannot be challenged by any person. Now I'll be moving to the second slide for elaborating why FTA is conducting the audit. The main motive of the audit is to maintain the integrity of the tax legislation, as addressed earlier. The authority will inspect the level of adherence to the compliance of the tax laws by the taxpayers. And when authority decides whether or not to conduct tax audit on the person, it shall consider mainly 3 points that I have listed below. So protecting the integrity of the tax system, the responsibility of the person associated with him to comply with tax laws and the likely tax revenue that is at stake. So can an entity can be re-audited if it was subject to audit earlier? Yes. FTA has the authority to re-audit the entity if they are having additional data or information which are likely to change the authority's perspective for the audit that has been conducted. So what are the means of notification that FTA is going to give to the taxpayers while they are coming for the audit? So FTA has 4 major means. One, they will send the notification at their post to the registered address. Then they can even send by electronic mean on the address that has been registered with the authority. Then if they may even post the notification on the premises of the taxable person, or if none of these can be done, they might agree with the taxpayer to give notification on other means that they are going to agree with the taxpayer. Now I'll be talking about the right to conduct tax audit by the FTA. The authority can inspect any premises where the documents are placed, or where the assets are placed, or where the accounting systems are placed. So the authority will have full power to visit the places where all these documents, asset or accounting system are maintained by the person. So if the documents are maintained at the residence of the taxpayer, the FTA will audit the taxpayer after getting permission from the public prosecutor, which I will elaborate moving down the line. So the notice of the audit, the auditor will need to have one copy of notice with them while they are going to visit the premises of the taxpayer, or if they are going to audit on the residence of the taxpayer, they should have the permits issued by the authority, as well as the permits that they have obtained from public prosecutors. Is the proof of identity if the taxpayer asks for the tax auditors. Moving further, the tax auditor has the right to enter any place of the person where he is conducting business, placed goods or records, and they have the authority to close the premises of the taxpayer sorry. Yes, I'll repeat the thing again. The tax auditor has the right to entry in the place where the person is subject to tax or audit. Beg your pardon. Yes. The tax auditor, they can temporarily close the premises for 72 hours without prior notice if they have details with them that the taxpayer has made a tax evasion, and authority believes that they have grounds to believe that they cannot conduct the audit without closing the premises. In doing so, they are bound to have a prior consent from the Director General. And if the place is the place of residence of the supplier of the taxpayer, then a permit from public prosecutor is required. So once they have closed it for 72 hours, it needs to be open. The premise needs to be open in next 72 hours. It can be extended for further period of 72 hours once they obtain permit from the public prosecutors. So once doing the audit, the criminal case can only be initiated only by the Director General of the authority. So the tax auditor, they have all the rights to access all the original records and copies of the tax original records that are maintained with the taxpayer. They can take sample of the sample of same. They can take sample of inventory or asset from the person, or they can seize as it is required by them. Now, the result of the audit. Once the audit is concluded by the taxpayer, the tax auditor has to furnish the tax report to the tax auditor has to furnish the report to taxpayer within 10 business working days. So the taxpayer, he has the right to obtain the records or documents from the authority to justify how the assessment of the due tax has been made, and he can apply to them within 20 business working days. And it is obligation of the tax auditor to provide the data in paper or electronic method is requested within 10 business working days. What are the documents which FTA are not going to share with us? It will be the working or their internal correspondence or correspondence on the basis of which the decision has been made by the authority, or they have some other confidential information or third-party documents which they had come into place while doing the audit. Apart from this thing, all documents may be furnished to the audit taxpayers. So after concluding the audit, the tax, as per Article 20 of the Cabinet Decision 36 of Decree Law, the taxes that are due on completion of the audit, it is considered as a debt that has to be paid by authority, and authority has all the rights to collect the tax due in a manner that is mentioned in the law. Now I'll be moving to the next slide. The previous one. We are going to move for taxpayers' right under FTA framework. Can I have previous slide, please? Thank you. Yes, the FTA must notify the person within 5 business days prior to the audits. But we have an exception that we had discussed in the earlier. When there is the tax evasion, the authority has right to conduct the audit even after closure of the business for 72 hours. If they are in strong belief that there is a tax evasion that is ongoing from the taxpayer, and we have right to see the identification card of the person coming to audit. To justify they have proper authority to come for audit. Also obtain a copy of notification from the tax auditor. Then we have all the rights to attend all the procedures that are ongoing outside the premises of the FTA. When if FTA has seized our documents, then we have a right to take the copy from them, and we have the right to know the custodian of the document who is going to have our documents. And after that, we have a right for appeal. This is for all the penalties that are coming due to late returns or late payment, or might be due to and of course the audit. So we can have first thing with it is reconsideration or penalty waiver approach. If we are not getting the favorable judgment out of this, we can go to TDRC. Then if we are not satisfied with it, then we have option to go to the court. But the amount up to the dispute amount, that is up to 100,000, that will be the final outcome in TDRC. Whatever we are going to challenge to courts, it has to be the amount in dispute, it has to be above 100,000. Now I'll give you a brief about how to prepare for VAT audit, which later on my colleague Nikita is going to elaborate on this matter. So all of us know, and we have already mentioned on the earlier slide, the authority is going to give us 5 days notice, or if, in case of evasion, even no notice at all. So it's since we have very little days to prepare after we are notified by the authority, the companies have to be audit ready. So once we have any notification from the FTA, and we can give them the response in very quick manner. So for that, we should have our updated books as per VAT returns. That is the most which is required. Then of course the correctness of the data and file, it has to be reconciled with the returns. And since documents are the backbones for justifying any transaction, FTA is very strict in this note, and they are concerned about the correctness of the document for invoicing, import, export, claiming inputs, all these factors. So most of the risk criteria, which attracts audit in the returns is seen as major fluctuation in the return of business or business performance on the turnover. Like sometimes we are filing the payable returns, sometimes refund, and there is no actual payments that are ongoing. Then of course the nil returns, and while we are filing sales that is equivalent to purchase, where the payment of tax might very minimal, or we can say low margin returns. For the companies where we know that they have a higher GP and they are filing with the low margin, they might get they are prone to the audits most. The FTA, while looking for the audit, so the FTA will be looking either the VAT is levied correctly or not. So they will look mainly through sales listing, then of course the classification of the service category and the invoice description. Then again, whether to check whether it's zero rated and exempt supplies are correctly classified or not, and input apportionment applicable to some of the entities has been done correctly or not. And mostly they will check the blocked inputs, either they have accounted it correctly or not. So I'll give you a brief description on what are the areas mostly FTA comes and for auditing, and which are the most criteria that are looked upon. If we see financial services, for the banking sectors, it is import apportionment scheme, And for the banking specific, it is either the services of the exempt category provided to the outside customers are zero rated or not. Then if we go to real estate, it will be transition provision, then advance receipt of the taxation. Then they are also mainly concerned about the internal control of the invoicing. Either we are invoicing the customers once upon the completion, or after the customer has accepted our supply or not. Then if we move to automotive sectors, it will be profit margin scheme, then again the commission, then inventories are mentioned properly or not. In case of logistics, like classification of local and international, and of course the points of the supply. Then if on normal, we can see they will be looking after for the revenue completeness, either the invoices are sequential or not. Then again the inventories, and of course the RICO, either our books are matching with the returns we furnished or not. And for the exports of goods, they are mainly concerned about commercial evidence, invoice, and the official evidence that the goods had moved out of the country, like exit certificates. So with this, I will conclude my points over here. Then I will hand over to Ms. Nikita, who will be elaborating further on how we should be audit ready and what are the documentation that we are going to need. Over to you, Ms. Nikita.
Thank you, Mr. Naresh, for such a beautiful introduction. And hello, everyone. Hope you're all having an enriching time with all the rich knowledge being shared regarding VAT by my fellow colleague. So now we have seen why FTA does conduct an audit, what are the taxpayer rights under the FTA audit. But let me also highlight on the most important and the basis of the audit, without which an audit is not an audit actually, it's incomplete. Yes, you're right, it's documentation. I know everybody has gone through the hassles and has been harassed by the auditor. Being an auditor myself, I know how difficult it is to get the right documents during the audit. Now, let me focus why documentation is so important and so essential part of our audit. See, firstly, we have to understand that documentation assists in observing and drawing conclusions from the same. And these observations and conclusions help in assessing the tax assessment and the impact of it on the taxpayer. Let me give you a few examples which I have come across during various pre-audit assignments. Firstly, we have seen that many of our clients, the trading companies, carry out exports. So during exports, they always say, yes, we do have all the documents in place. We can prove that it's an export. But do you know that right now, the FTA is more stressing in the point of having an exit certificate to prove it as an export. Yes, you're right. As per the law, you require an official document which has to be stamped by the custom authority, so as to prove that it's an exit, unless which the complete supply would be treated as a standard rated supply. Same way it goes for the imports. Now, for the imports also, there are many cases in it, which means that there are reimbursement, disbursement, imports taken by the agent, clearance. So it's very important when you have imports, we have the right documents so that we could look into it and we could assess it properly and we could disclose it according to the returns. Many people think, why it's so important? But trust me, if you don't disclose it properly on the VAT returns, it again goes against you because it's again a faulty disclosure in the VAT returns, thus calling for the penalties. Again, very common, out of scope supply. Many of our clients have been saying that the supply is an out of scope. But trust me, why do you think it's an out of scope? You have to follow the conditions for the same. You would also have to follow the proper documentation for the same. Unfortunately, for the designated zone also, many of our clients or many of the people in the market who are in the designated zone do not have the proper documentation for the same. Thus, documentation is very important for to assess whether it's a supply, a designated, is an out of scope, an exempt, or a zero rated. I shall also emphasize more on this by giving you a few unique examples. Like, consider the principal is outside the UAE. The agent is in UAE who's responsible for selling the products in the UAE. Now, the tricky part here is the goods are sold, which earns commission, but with the goods which are not sold, it earns compensation. Now, to ascertain the compensation nature, the tax liability, is very important to review the contract, the terms of the contract which the principal and the person responsible of selling the product have entered into. Then in case the compensation here is considered to be out of scope, since there is a consideration but no service for the same. One more example that I would like to highlight is a branded product company is outside the UAE, and it has an arrangement with an advertising agency within the UAE to advertise the products and build the market for the products the same. Now here the consideration received by the branded company and to the advertising company is zero rated. Why? Since the agency and the branded company are not the owners of the product, but just merely advertising them to build the products market in the UAE. Thus, now you know that documentation does an integral part of the audit, also to assess the way transaction has to be assessed and disclosed in the VAT returns. Now, as I said earlier also, my whole point in highlighting these examples was simply identifying the transaction as taxable, zero-rated, out of scope, is just not simply recommended just by saying, okay, this transaction has been placed, so it should be so and so nature. But it is very important to review the documents and it is very important that on these bases, they're categorized and put in the right directions, providing a right disclosure in the VAT returns. Now, the other advantages of a strong documentation are highlighted as in the PPT as well. That is, first, they act as an evidence regarding to adherence to the policies, which means if an FTA issues a notice for an audit, a strong system of documentation acts as an evidence against any FTA audit. Considering if they say, we find so and so things are missing, so we penalize you, or we would like to have an assessment for tax liability for the same, but if you have a strong set of documents with you, you could just prove them that no, that whatever they're assessing or they are trying to prove or demand is inappropriate. And thus we can act as a great evidence. Secondly, reference purpose. If an auditor or a management discovers any mistake, they can with very ease and in very smoothly can go back to the past reference and the review of the previous documents, which also helps them to rectify any mistakes if they're committed in the past. Third, safeguard against any tax impact. As I stated in the first, if there's documents that act as an evidence for you, obviously it also will safeguard you from any tax impact or any penalties or any possible litigations in the future course of business. Now, as I say this, I move on to the next slide, that is bursting the myth around the FTA audit. Now, here you might have heard the name term as FTA audit. We all know FTA audit sounds very scary. The time we see or we hear that an FTA has conducted an assessment, has provided you a notice, or there is an audit, the things stands loose. And to tell you this, that the most common misconceptions that I'm going to state you right now, that is one, that is time consuming, that FTA audits, they're too time consuming. Secondly, if it's an FTA audit, there is a penalty stress. There is a penalty for sure because that goes back around our mind. Third, it's a complicated process. It's an aggravated paperwork and lack of timely response. Now, to tell you this, let me share my experience you over the same that I have pre-audited and our company has reviewed the same. Now, one of a client, I'm sorry, but being an NDA bound company, and we also value our companies, our clients' confidentiality. So I will not be able to tell which client, but yes, I can share you the case study for the same. That is, a client is based from the construction business, and the projects have started in considering 2015 and 16, and there was few advance payments received for the same. Now, FTA assumed that a certain completion of the projects was still pending, and they thought that there should be some more projects to be completed after 2018. That is right after the implementation of the VAT law in the UAE market. Now, they had the assessment against their already filed returns, and they came into the conclusion that the client had to pay a tax liability, which could be as high as 10 million dirhams. Yes, you're right, it's very high. So later we were called for the assistance. And when we looked into and we realized that this assessment was inappropriate and it was incorrect. And we were very successful in telling and able to prove the FTA with the proper documentation and the evidences. And we successfully reduced the penalty, the tax liability to as low as 600,000. Yes. So as I said in previous, our strong documentation is always a basis of an audit and also safeguards from your tax impact. So hence I proved this from this example. Secondly, one of other clients, he was practicing a very conservative approach of not claiming the input tax. Yes, in our market, many of you would have just been claiming the input tax just because you know that anything purchases, anything expenses, you can claim it. But no, it's not. But surprisingly, this client was something different. He was practicing a very conservative approach. And I just give an example, like for a staff accommodation utilities, like a utility, like for the Deva bill or something that you can just claim. But he was like, no. Since there was a public clarification out for the same, and he was like, no, I will not claim those input tax for the same. But because since they were just concerned regarding the FTA would disallow it, it was when we intervened in the pre-audit, we realized that they are following a conservative approach and they could be claiming an input tax for the same. We explained the law behind it and the concept behind it so that they could recover in the future returns. So as you see with the following examples, that those misconceptions which we stated earlier could be solved and made into an easy, friendly process. And this could be only said with the right documentation, a good internal process together, and having an efficient team of consultants by your side. So by this, I wrap up my point of busting the myth around FTA audit, and I hope that it sounds more easier if next time you think about an FTA audit. So I move on to my next slide, which is called as why an external VAT audit is a need of the hour. So an organization has an internal audit committee to review their accounts, the financials, their invoices, to state everything in accordance to the tax compliances. But do we realize that if it's an internal policy, there is always a chance that that things can be loose hold, there will be loopholes that even the management will not be able to understand or will not realize it. So it is very sufficient right now that to have an external VAT audit, because it helps to identify any error, it also provides an efficient adherence to updated appropriate practices in the organization. And yes, I think that is why it serves the purpose of an external VAT audit. And also, as I told you about, that if you have an FTA audit, it is much required to have an external VAT audit so as to have a more overview look of the picture. So as I say, I highlight the three important points of having an external VAT audit. One is the management aware of the tax practice organization. In my very recent experiences, and as we see that there have been many tax updates for the ease of the taxpayer to comply with the law. But how many of us do we really know what exactly the updation is, what exactly the interpretation of the tax law is? Like, just give you an example that many of the companies right now in the market have been claiming the personal nature of expenses, that is employer-related expenses. Like example, an office car, a petrol expense, an entertainment expense, mobile phones, etc., etc., etc. But do you know that there has been a public clarification for it, which doesn't allow us to claim it in our VAT returns? So it is very important that the management is required to be updated with the current practices, with the new regulations to incorporate in day-to-day practices. Also, we know that the FTA has started now doing a surprise visit to the premises and conducting a surprise audits and providing you the assessment without even your knowledge. So it's really very important at this point that you require an external audit so as to know what exactly your organization has been practicing. A third party viewpoint, that is, as I said, if it's an internal control practice, it will always have a loophole or there will be some end loose that you would not know. So how can you know that? Unless you have an external VAT audit team actually specifying, identifying in an unbiased manner and offering you suggestions or corrections that could rescue the taxpayer from any penalties or legal obligations or legal litigations, I'm sorry. Next is human errors. Human errors, we know that is bound by our nature. We every time see there is something or the error that has been committed by a human. So that has been a root cause, which for any omission in fraud or in errors, any penalties that has been caused because of the wrong disclosure in the VAT return. But when you have an external VAT audit, it provides you strict vigilance over the same to avoid any errors during the future course of the business. As I wind up with the external VAT audit, I now go up to the last slide and the conclusion for this VAT pre-audit, that is a one-stop solution for VAT health check. Now, we at ITC, let me tell you, we have our own way of pre-audit and how do we conduct our audit. Firstly, we are very concerned regarding how are the tax returns filed. We also overview regarding your workings, the reconciliation for the same. We also ensure that your returns and the workings do tally on the same page so as to not have any discrepancies of any so far. Also, we even look into your summaries, that is the monthly, you could say, the sales and the purchases, and we do the samplings, a random sampling, a surprise check sampling, so as to cover the basic risk areas and have a complete coverage of your business. We also ensure that we check the risky areas, like as I pointed out earlier in my slide, for the like the staff-related expenses, so the risky areas which has been pinpointed by the FTA, so on and so forth. And we ensure that if you have any penalties, if you have any tax assessment from the FTA, we look into the root cause of the situation, we'll try to correct it, and we provide you the best possible solution by our expert team. Also, by saying this, we provide you this one stand umbrella for all the services. And as I state down right now in our PPT, that is first is assessment of the tax compliance. As I said, that we identify the risk factors, the gap identification, the risk profile parameters. We also review the computation of taxes, that is the right treatments provided to the transactions undertaken by the company and the arithmetical accuracy of the output and the input tax. We also review the VAT returns, that is right disclosures in the correct boxes and submission returns on a timely basis and the correct timely payment of the liability before the due date. We also stress and emphasize on areas of improvement because we would like that our clients would not repeat the same mistake and in future they don't face the same hassle that they faced it right now. So we identify the areas such as input tax recovery, internal process, documentation, record keeping, etc. And trust me, in our ITC, we have an expert tax advisory. We have a great team of efforts that we get in for providing the best possible solution to understanding every query or the concern that the client is facing. And that is our motto, that we serve them with our best possible solutions. So yeah, we provide proper consultation for them for the future audits by the FTA. So that's it. That's how I wrap the VAT part. And I hope the points and the has been properly understood. And thank you for all being such a wonderful audience, for your precious time and attention to our presentation. Thank you once again. Adios.